everybody. Welcome to, I think this is number 4 of our psychological safety series, our table talks. Today, I'm excited to have Amy get in here. She's going to be talking with us about creating psychological and digital spaces. What a timely topic. Really quickly, my name is Dr. Alessandria Polizzi. I'm the CEO of Verdant Consulting. We focus on teaching resiliency skills, emotional agility, and psychological health and safety for the workplace. And I'm pleased to be here with Amy. And go ahead and introduce yourself, Amy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Giddin. I have a long career in corporate, so I know what it's like to navigate all sorts of size of corporate structures, but I'm currently an entrepreneur trying to create better connection in digital spaces. So I'm really happy to be here today.
Yes, awesome. And I'm so happy to have you. I mean, this is really the world we live in, right? So let's just dive in. Our goal here is to be really conversational. So, it's just going to be Amy and I talking about psychological safety, and we're really going to be focusing on Zoom and the Zoom-like products. So real quickly, let's talk about what is psychological safety. So psychological safety, I'll talk a lot about that throughout these table talks, but it has 3 components. One is, do we have the structure in place that will reinforce psychological safety, or do we have structures in place that undermine it? Things like role clarity are important here. But looking at how you create the structure and infrastructure of your organization is part of creating psychological safety. Looking at the whole environment, are there pressures or stressors that exist outside of the workplace or that are impacting the workplace? Things like, do we have a difficult supply chain? Are we dealing with customers who are under a lot of duress or stress? Those are things to acknowledge. In the digital space, it's what is the environment and the platform that we use, and does it facilitate interaction or the kinds of things we want to create trust? And then finally, expectation. And this is really about our behavioral expectations within the organization of what do we expect as far as how people show up. Let's talk about digital spaces. Do people show up on time? Are they distracted? Are they off camera? Are they, fill in the blank? So there's various ways in which we can implement psychological safety in our various digital spaces. And so, why now? Well, a lot of us are trying to figure out, what does the future look like? We've all been able to make this transition. We've proven that working remotely works. And so it's starting to become part of the new normal and the expectation, right, of new hires, new employees as they join the organization. So it's incredibly important now to identify what can impede psychological safety and connection, and what can accelerate it. Don't you think, Amy? Anything you want to add on those so far?
No, the time is exactly now. Yes.
Yes. And so let's talk about what we need to do now. So again, we're focusing on the video conferencing technologies. Fill in the one that's your favorite here. And so, Amy, what are some watch outs that you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen a bunch. No one's neutral about Zoom and its brethren, right? We have strong feelings one way or another. And it's interesting. I think, there's a lot of people who feel like the world's actually slowed down and actually is more accommodating to the way they like to work. So I'm not going to talk a lot today about the wonders and benefits of Zoom, because I think it's important when we talk about psychological safety to talk a little bit more about the watch outs. But I do want to acknowledge there are some benefits as well. So if we want to get into that, if we have time, we can talk about that later. But I have 4 that I wanted to cover today. So should we start with the first one, Al? I think the first one is the lack of ability to read the room, right? When you see people in little partridge family squares, is that what it was? You can't read social cues the way you can when you're in person, and you can't read the room. You don't have the benefit of eye contact. You don't have the benefit of body language. So it can be really challenging in so many ways. It's very hard to know when someone wants to speak, or for you yourself to indicate that you want to speak. For those that have a hard time already, like kind of raising their hand, it can be nearly impossible to find that space and that inclination to speak. And I'll say too that what you miss in Zoom rooms are social support. You know, I also have a background in women's leadership, and I would walk into a meeting with a female friend and be like, hey, you got my back? Like, here's something I need to say. And she would help me, right? So you don't even have the social support of your work colleagues to help you get a word in edgewise, even when it's important. So what can happen because of all of that is people feeling isolated, people feeling like it's hard to speak, the room not leaving with a sense of understanding because there isn't that acknowledgement and the visual cues of nodding and agreement, or the other visual cues of I don't agree. So it's hard to feel aligned. So I'm looking at some of the comments. So yeah, so these are great. I have a couple of starter suggestions for how to counteract this idea of not being able to read the room. And Al, I'm going to throw it to you to add to the list. So one thing I'll just say to all the facilitators here is ask, right? Don't assume that if people have something to say, that they're going to say it. Don't assume that silence means agreement. It's a really important opportunity to ask. And hand in hand with that is to pause. We have to get more comfortable with awkward silences, because some people are not going to jump in unless it's completely quiet and they feel like there's room for them. And then the last thing I'll just tee up as a tip is to use all the tools. Use the chat, use the poll, use the hand raise. That's a really underutilized, I think, feature on many of these. And invite people to use all these tools to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard in the way that they're comfortable with. So I'm just going to pause there. Al, what do you have to add?
I would add, I'm going to build on what you said, which is leveraging the breakout rooms. I cannot emphasize enough the joy that I see on people's faces when they come back from a breakout room, because they've had a chance to create connection with other people and have a dialogue. And it is palpable when people return from those. So I highly recommend them. The other thing is that think about how our brains evolved over 200,000 years. They evolved to read social cues, to understand facial expressions, to being, as infants, we even can pick up on the feelings of other people. And if you're an empath, not having the ability to do that can feel very isolating and very difficult. So paying attention to your needs in connecting with other people is another thing to look out for.
No, I love that. I had a fascinating conversation with a neuropsychiatrist or neurobiologist, and we're just talking about what's different when you're in person in physical proximity to someone versus mediated through a screen. And the human body, it's just amazing. You know, your eyes dilate, you start mirroring each other subconsciously, you emit pheromones, like all of this magic chemistry happens when you are in a room with somebody, and we lose that, right? So we just have to work extra hard to create that sense of real human connection. Should we go to the next?
All right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is about hierarchies. So there's in the workplace, hierarchies are, a way of life. There's always such a thing as status, usually in like corporate structures. There's positional hierarchies, and they're pretty well known to everybody. But in this era of hybrid work in particular, and also Zoom meetings, there's new hierarchies emerging. There's in the room and not in the room, right? So there's in the room and on the screen, and then even on the screen, and that's true even for our small and mighty get together today, there's people on camera and off camera. And all of these things, create different kinds of, hierarchies. So another watch out is to just be very aware of whether everyone is getting equal attention, regardless of their level of presence in that meeting or in that get together. So I have a couple starter recommendations here too. I was going to mention breakout rooms here. I mean, breakout rooms are a fantastic suggestion for almost all of the watchouts we're going to throw at you today. But breakout rooms really break down hierarchies, especially when you can meet with 3 or 4 people and just be human together, because it's our shared humanity more than anything that breaks down hierarchies. So yes, liberal use of breakout rooms. And I do have another suggestion here. To counteract all of these watchouts, what we all need is really good facilitators. Like it's always been a beautiful skill, the science and the art of facilitating meetings, but in a virtual setting, it's even more important that we have got wonderful facilitators who have all these watchouts in mind and take the pains and make the effort, to counteract them. So one thought here is to have rotating facilitators. So really, first of all, it trains lots of people on how to be an able facilitator. It gives people empathy for how hard it is to facilitate a meeting when they themselves have to do it. And then a facilitator, it can be someone in the room one day, in the Zoom chat, in the Zoom another day, even someone off camera. So we get used to hearing from people and taking cues from people in all different levels of presence. Oh,
Is that also in the chat? Yeah.
Peers. Yeah.
Yeah. About engaging peers in different ways. Yeah.
So any other thoughts about hierarchy and how to break down those barriers, Al?
If I can comment on one thing that I actually experienced last week. So last week we had a power outage, and so I didn't have my nice fancy HD quality webcam, and so I was on my pretty junky integrated camera on my laptop, and I was very grainy. You couldn't really see me. I mean, it looked, not very high quality. What I noticed was how the person on the other side interacted with me changed once my power came back on and my camera changed. Their interaction with me was markedly more engaged. They were more interested in what I had to say when I was clearer than they did when I was fuzzy. And I thought, that is fascinating, because if you work with people who come, thank you, Becky. If you work with people who come from a wide variety of backgrounds, we all don't necessarily have access to the same internet speed, technology, backgrounds. Not everybody can have the fancy, whatever happening in the background, or some people, their kids walk up, right? And so how do we create equity within even this space, so that everyone has a chance to be heard and we don't have those biases showing up, because they're real.
They are. And I think awareness is always the first step, right? And empathy. I had a really interesting conversation with an educator about how the students were showing up. And I know we're talking about the workplace here, but she was so frustrated that so many of the students had their cameras off. And if they had them on, they had their hoodie on, their face was basically in shadow. And she ultimately understood that many of these students were from disadvantaged backgrounds and they were embarrassed about their surroundings.
Yeah.
So you just only need a little reminder about people's circumstances to feel, compassion for how we need to show up sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of when I worked for 7-Eleven and Pizza Hut. I would work in the restaurant or in the store once a quarter at least. And just how people would speak to me when I had that uniform on was remarkably different from how, they normally interact. And so those things are real. We need to be aware of them. And then as leaders and as facilitators in this workplace, we need to make sure that we're not participating in those biases. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Heather. Okay. Was there any, hey, Becky has hand up.
Your
Hey.
hands up. Woohoo!
I didn't want to interrupt, but I had something to add about that. With you mentioning the hierarchy of cameras versus in the meeting, I never thought of it. One thing we've been doing to kind of ameliorate that, I guess, is we've been doing movement meetings where we empower our employees to turn their cameras off to avoid Zoom fatigue, and then allow them to be like, if they're going stretching or getting up to get a cup of water or like going on a walk or just really turning that off. And then another thing, in the beginning of the pandemic, we noticed people being, if they had to turn their camera off, they'd say, I'm sorry, I'm still engaged. I'm just here on the side eating oatmeal or whatever. And we said, hey guys, we implicitly trust you. If you need to get a glass of water, if anything that's going on, an emergency comes up in the background, so that we put that out there, right? We're not going to judge you differently if the camera goes off and assume you're not engaged, assume you're not this. You're an adult. You make the decision. And so it kind of broke down that barrier where the hierarchy lost its power in terms of camera on, camera off. Right? We're saying leaders are, please do. Okay, I'll get off my box, but hopefully that was helpful.
No, that is very helpful. But I think one thing that I would request as somebody who is more empathic is that when you're off camera, if you could put, like Amy and Krista have and Trisha, a picture of yourself, because some of us don't want to talk to just a black screen. We want to talk to faces. And so again, think about our evolution of how we interact and how we survive, and our psychological well-being has to do with interpersonal connection. So we have to balance the equity, which is totally needed, with the human connection.
I see another hand up.
Oh, all right. Here we go.
Becky started it. I love it. I worked a lot with leaders, and I remember when we, with the pandemic hitting and everybody going back home, there was this need and want for connect. And I remember with one leader, we talked about the camera, and I asked them if they ever turned the camera on. They just looked at me, and I said, so talk about leading with expectations and creating the space and permission. They often will say to our associates, well, we don't care what you're dressed, but they're always in a suit and tie. Well, you're surprised what you're not saying and how you're showing up, and how that creates a different expectation. At the same time, there's also the other piece of it, which is it's okay to set some expectations. It's just, as Becky mentioned, understand that people are home. It is different, and be flexible, be absolutely flexible with it. It's okay to say, hey, I would love to see your face, but maybe it's not for the whole session. Maybe it's just in the beginning, or as you ask a question, just, play with your group, see what they're comfortable with, but how you set up the environment really impacts how people engage with it as well.
I love it.
I love that. I think that modeling is the critical factor here, right? From people that do have more positional power, right? So people are looking up for cues about how to act, people that are facilitating meetings. There's such an important opportunity and need for people to model the behaviors. I love the suit and tie example, right?
So
right.
good.
Yeah.
So
I tried getting them to wear a t-shirt.
yeah,
it didn't go well, but they're like, well, maybe I could just wear something that's something in between. I'm like, that's fine. But just again, remember your expectations need to kind of meet with how you're showing up too. So
right.
I
love everything you're saying.
Today. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, shall we go to the next one, Amy?
I think so, yeah. Okay, this is about meeting agendas. So one thing that has happened as we started to collect more frequently in virtual spaces is that there's a tendency for meetings to become very agenda-centric to the point of even being a little transactional. And I think that there's two things going on. One is it's the nature of the medium. I'll talk about that. And the other one is the recognition of everyone's overwhelm and burnout and trying to be efficient with the use of time. So for both of those reasons, a lot of these meetings are very prescribed. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And we're going to adjourn when we go through the meeting. So what that does for us is that it kind of undermines our human desire for connection and can leave us feeling in very transactional relationships with our colleagues. And it also takes away the opportunity for spontaneity, for tangents, where sometimes that's where the magic happens. You can't go off on tangents all the time, but innovation happens in the crevices, right? So we're not making space for those things, for that magic to happen, and for those magic human moments to happen. So there's a real need here to balance the need for efficiency and clarity with the need for human connection and spontaneity. So here again, and I think, Radha, I'll go back to your comment about modeling. This is a great opportunity for meeting hosts to model, right? So we can start the meeting with, hey, just doing a little bit of check-in here before we jump into the agenda. Ask an icebreaker type question that doesn't feel contrived. Just want to take the temperature of the room. Anybody have something they want to share with the group, right? And just take 3 minutes to kind of set the table. And again, leaders have a real opportunity to model that behavior. I think too, it's really important to think about these bigger meetings, especially in a continuum where there's a conversation before and a conversation after. They can't just sit there in a vacuum. So maybe that the leader needs to extend themselves to a couple people that they might know are feeling wary coming into the meeting. Yes, great. So I'm looking at the comment, breakout rooms, again, absolutely critical here. And then afterwards, doing a check-in. You were quiet during that meeting, right? Was there something that wasn't said or you felt uncomfortable? What are you feeling, right? So kind of extending a agenda-laden meeting to a before and an after can also really help to embrace those that don't always feel comfortable in those kind of meetings. And then the other thing I would say is planned spontaneity. I know that's an oxymoron, but carving in time for those magic moments to happen. And there's ways to do this. I actually attended a pretty incredible session of, we were being trained as facilitators with all these different tips and tricks for how to run meetings, and from physical things to little games. And they're all of a couple of minutes, but they go a really long way to breaking up long agendas, to humanizing the room, to letting people feel like there's more going on and there's space for some magic to happen in the course of that meeting. So I'll take a pause and let everybody else jump in here.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to add a couple, and again, I'm also paying attention to our time out of respect for everyone. But so I also recommend the pre and post kind of hangout. So if it's your meeting or you're the manager, come on a little early. Make sure you're the last one off the call. So if someone wants to grab you, they can. The other thing is that invest in understanding the social styles or the communication styles, whatever your flavor is that you like. I am a PI person, but you can also do strengths. Know that about your team, because that will show you different needs and different goals and purposes and drives, right? So if you have a highly social team, then you'll need space, but maybe the people who don't have high social, they can leave early. They don't have to come to the awkward part where no one's talking, right? So investing in knowing who everyone is at that personal level can be really helpful.
Love that. Should we go through, in the interest of time, should we go through the last one? Just
yes.
and then we can see if we have any extra
Yes, but you're
here.
going to hate me because I added one. So I'll speak to mine. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So this one is about distractions. So a certain amount of distractibility is part of the modern age that we live in. I mean, we're just at a heightened pitch, but in digital spaces, there's some particular watch outs, which are that many of us are working from home. The distractions are real, whether it's a toddler, whether it's an unruly partner, whether it's the doorbell ringing. The distractions are real. I call it homing from work, right? So those things happen. We're also distracted because we're stressed out. And we're also very susceptible to distractibility because, especially if we're not on camera, we might be on Slack. We might be answering a text message. It certainly opens up the door for multitasking, right? Which doesn't really honor yourself or the other people in the room. So it's really hard on us from both ends. It's hard on us to resist the very strong temptation to multitask. I feel it all the time. You see something out of the corner of your eye dinging on your phone, but everyone sees your eye dart away for a millisecond to your phone. But it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of intentionality, right, to remain distraction free and present during a meeting. And then on the receiving end, I think we've probably all experienced how yucky it feels when you know someone's not there with you, right? They're just distracted. They're not present. So a couple of tips here. And again, this is another opportunity for leaders to model, right? So I love the idea of coming into a meeting and setting the room. Leaders can say, even give a minute to, I know we're all busy. This is why I think this is an important time for us to be together. And I want us all to really be present for these 30 minutes. I'm going to turn off my phone and put it away like I would in a normal conference room where it's turned over. I'm going to silence everything else and I don't have any other tabs open. And they can also say, sometimes it's easier to be present if everyone has a minute to get something off their chest that is preventing them from being present. I've been in some masterful meetings where people even do a meditation, just a 2-minute mindfulness moment to set off the next 30 minutes. And it's really powerful, right? To get people present, let them breathe for a minute, set aside whatever they walked in that room with, and sort of reclaim their focus for the duration of that meeting. So I love that. I know that's not for everybody. So if mindfulness or meditation feels like too much, at least you can say, let's take a breath. Let's just have a moment to clear, and let's just be here for each other for the next 45 minutes. So
Yeah.
those are some thoughts. And the biggest opportunity is just to set your own intention to be present. Okay, over to you, Al.
Well, I can't add anything to that, but I added a couple more pictures of, look, we're all living our lives while we're doing this work. I love how you say doing work. But how did you say it, Amy?
Homing from work.
Homing from work. I love it. And so, the one thing that actually I have enjoyed in this situation has been getting to see everyone in their homes. I get to see the cats, the dogs, the babies, and while we may be mortified, right, that happens, it is a way for us to create human connection. And so don't reject that part of yourself, I guess would be my watch out, is create a space where being human is the expectation, and that's okay, because that's how you build psychological safety, is by people being able to be their authentic selves, right? And my authentic self is, my cat, I don't have a cat. Thank you though. My bird, squawking. I'm constantly apologizing for him making a lot of noise, which I'm surprised you haven't heard him yet, etc. So, we are all, living our lives as well. We had a couple more about boundaries, didn't we?
I thought we might save that for the next time, but I could also
let's do that. Okay. Let's save that for the next time. So speaking of next time, we're going to be, Amy doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to be inviting her potentially to do a roundtable where we'll have several folks from different digital companies come together to talk about creating connection and culture in hybrid and digital spaces. So my plan is to have that sometime in May. We'll see when Amy's available. But I already have an accept from someone from Adobe too. So we'll have some good intermix there. Why does it matter that we pay attention to how we create psychological safety in digital spaces? Well, we're by far spending a lot more time in these type of environments than we are anywhere else. And we have a huge departure of employees leaving. Why are they leaving? They're 10 times more likely to leave in a toxic work environment. And so we need to pay attention to and be intentional about creating safe spaces, both in person and online. And by doing that, we create safety for people to be their authentic selves take risks, ask questions, and feel like they have a place to land when that happens. Okay, so that is our, look at that. Boom, 30 minutes. So you can connect with Amy. Here's her LinkedIn. She has this amazing product called Aloha. And you can also connect with me on, oh, not on LinkedIn, on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably where tattoo artists go. But so together, Amy and I actually created a resiliency version of Aloha. And I think there's a link to it on this next page, which has, well, this one called verdantconsulting.net/psych safety. I create a special page dedicated to all of our psychological safety table talks. There's also a psychological safety risk calculator. So if you would like to prove out the financial impact of investing in psychological safety, this will do the math for you. And then a bunch of other resources. Our next one of our table talks is next week. We'll be talking about creating psychological safety in learning spaces. So that how do you focus on helping people learn by creating psychological safety? Following that, we're going to be talking about new employee psychological safety. You know, just as we have people leave, we have people coming in, right? And so how do we do that? Especially people who maybe have never met in person. Then later on in the month, Deb Best and I will be talking about using things like PI and DISC to create psychological safety. And then we have a few more planned, including one on emotional agility. And I got more planned in April. I won't bother you with. So keep coming back so we can keep talking about this from all different dimensions of how we create psychological safety in the workplace.
This is awesome.
Thank you guys.
Sorry, I had to just jump in and say, this is awesome. This is,
thank you.
I love it.
So much. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for spending 30 minutes with us. Thank you again, Amy, for all of your great tips. Always so informative. And everybody have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording.